Hey, everybody, and welcome to Compliance Conversations. I'm so thankful that you are here with me to have this interesting conversation with my guest today, Bonginkosi Z Ntabeni. He's a CFA Charterholder. He holds the position of Senior Associate within a commercial bank in Zimbabwe, and he's primary focus is in the area of mergers and acquisitions and structured finance. And he's been kind enough to agree to have this conversation with me where we're going to be discussing the world of corporate finance and its interactions with compliance. So thank you so much, Bongi, for agreeing to be here today and being my guest again. This is your second time on Compliance Conversations, so welcome back.
Thank you.
Awesome. I'm really excited to have this conversation because you sit in the business area, right? You are doing your thing, and we are compliance officers. I'm in the risk and compliance officers in that space. And, typically in the corporate environment, our role is to support you and, just make sure that you're able to do what you can do in a risk managed way. And that's the conversation that I want us to have today. Oh, you've suddenly gone on mute. I've lost your sound. Sometimes technology is not our friend. Can you hear me? Yeah, I could hear you perfectly fine. I'm not sure what the issue is now. Okay. You can troubleshoot that because, as we all know, technology sometimes does things. If need be, maybe you can log out and log back in. That might trigger whatever has kicked out your sound. I will just be sure to keep an eye on everything. I see we've got Terry Lane in the building. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to have you here. We're just fixing our technical issues that sometimes do plague us. Bongi, why don't you try logging out? Can you hear me? Wait, I think you're getting it. Hello?
Hi.
There
I can hear you now. Great.
Excellent.
Awesome.
I'm not sure what you did, but if your sound disappears again, just do that again because you're back now.
Okay.
But yeah, without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. Like I was saying, our role in compliance is to support you and help you do what you need to do in a way that is manages risk effectively. So that's the conversation that I want us to have today. But before we jump into our relationship and how we interact as risk function and business, can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do in the M&A and structured finance in the simplest terms possible, so that we really understand, how this business area works?
I'm actually curious what you were doing talking to yourself for a whole minute.
You have no idea the depths to which I can go. I can fill the air. I can fill the blank space.
All right, that's great. So I think the long and short of it is, in specifically the M&A space, we do with the buying and selling of all businesses. I think that's the simplest and quickest way of saying that. And in terms of structured transactions, it's more or less just passing the risk to the party that's happy to accept it, and then give that party the return that's commensurate with that risk. So again, I think that would probably be a one sentence to explain what a structured transaction is. I think a structured transaction is easier understood with an example. So consider you've got a country that wants to buy 100,000 tons of wheat, probably over the next 6 months, and you've got a party that can supply, or three parties externally that can supply that amount, and they'll be supplying it into a whole country, so probably into different buyers in the country. A structure there will be to aggregate the buyers on one side so that all the wheat is imported into one country, and aggregate the sellers on the other side. And over the 6 months or whatever, have the wheat coming in and different parties buy, and the money is transferred to the other side. It's pretty much the simplest example I can think of. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And what is your role in this transaction? I know you said you're involved in execution and all of that. Just explain a little bit exactly what you do in that process.
Okay, so my primary responsibility is solving the problem, i.e., this is the problem, this is the person with the capacity, or sometimes they don't even have the capacity to execute. So we then take that on. Okay, what's the best way to solve this problem? It involves a lot of talking to people. It involves a lot of talking to regulators and authorities. That's where you guys come in as well. And pretty much once you have that, it's really matchmaking. You're done with the matchmaking, and it then goes on to the documentation side. The lawyers get involved, and then pretty much you then go for it. So it's the execution is the putting the pieces together, and then identifying who can hold what piece.
Okay, so if I use your example, you've got country XYZ looking to purchase wheat. Your role would be to find people who can supply and make delivery of that and make all the arrangements for that transaction to take place, whether it's multiple buyers or multiple sellers
Correct.
and single seller, and make sure that that transaction actually happens and is financed and the delivery takes place. So that would be your involvement in that.
Yeah. So pretty much, but my involvement ends when people sign. By the time the wheat is coming in,
It's no longer your problem that delivery took place.
No,
They
it's no
signed
longer
the
my problem.
documents. Okay, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
very interesting space. And I think when you think about corporate finance, or when I have historically thought about corporate finance, it was always kind of like, unclear. Like you said, mergers and acquisitions. It's like, okay, someone is buying a company. I know, like, all the twittering about, the Twitter purchase and all of that that's happening,
Yeah.
or supposed to be happening, would fall, squarely in that space. But in terms of the different types of transaction in the corporate finance side, that's where, I had an understanding, and I've worked in the trade finance space, so I think kind of there's alignment there a little bit, but I didn't really have a firm understanding of, so what does it actually involve? So which is why I said simplest terms, so that anyone can kind of get an understanding of what that is. So when you're talking about that and you're doing that, what sort of risks are you looking at in terms of that you have to manage on a day-to-day basis? And which functions do you typically work with when you are doing these transactions to make sure that you have line of sight of the risks that you might have to face and are managing those effectively?
Okay. So I think within the organization, you'd have a compliance function. You would actually have a risk function as well. So pretty much, yes, I would be working with the compliance function and the risk function. So the compliance function, I think, is predominantly involved in regulatory compliance and in your AML, KYC. That's what you guys call it, right?
Yes.
So really, it's it's who are you dealing with, right?
Yeah.
So you actually need to understand I am dealing with party XYZ, and there's a whole process and procedure to actually identifying people, right? It's in terms of documentation and the like. If they're internationals, then we also rely on other banks, right? You have banking relationships. Then it becomes easier to say, for instance, Bank Y in jurisdiction South Africa, let's call it. This is your client. This is what they're saying they can do. How can you assist us actually get to understand and know who this person is, who this party is? And ordinarily, then that support would also come in terms of a communication platform. So then the banks communicate on Swift. Then that really that gives you comfort, because now you've got the identification of a person, and you're communicating with someone who is also held to the same standard in terms of actually verifying who a party is, where's their money coming from, that type of thing. So that's stage one. That's really at onboarding. So you can actually have a great transaction die at that stage, right? And then the second stage now would be you've identified this is the person. You have, depending on the transaction, if it's a merger, if it's an acquisition, if it's public or if it's private, depending on the size of the company, there are certain rules that you follow. Again, the compliance function plays a key role. in defending our licenses. If we're operating under investment advisor license, then we need to comply, right? There are specific rules about how a transaction is executed, the actual procedure of doing it, where shareholders notified in time. Did the vote actually count in terms of quorum and the like and the like? If you're representing third parties, is your documentation correct to represent those third parties? So it's really a lot of dotting I's and crossing T's. And I think the front office guys don't like doing that. So whatever,
You just want to
so
run
grateful,
with it. You run with the show. Get it done.
whatever, so grateful. So there's that. And then you then actually go to the risk function. The risk function is more key if you're putting in balance sheet in terms of managing your exposures, in terms of managing your limits, and because remember, you working within a large organization, and you may not necessarily be aware of the extent to which you're exposed to a sector or to a specific product or whatever it is. The risk function is quite key in that, because they play a key role in the portfolio construction of the financial institution, as it were. So you may then actually have to share some of that risk with other institutions, be it other financial institutions or maybe other investors with capacity to take on that risk and the like. So the risk function then comes in there. So where I would be quite boxed in trying to put the pieces together for my transaction, the support functions are making sure that I am doing everything right according to procedure, and they're making sure that I am not putting on any extra risk which the organization cannot take. So I think it then becomes quite key and critical for these functions not only to understand what we are doing, but to understand what the whole organization is doing, not just to stop us, but to probably help us structure and package better.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and you just said not just to stop us, and that their roles is to support you at the end of the day. So, in a little bit more, excuse me, in a little bit more detail, can you unpack what you think or what your expectations are of those functions? You've already mentioned that they need to understand what you're doing, and that's a conversation that I have with my compliance peers a lot of the time, and people that are doing training and stuff with me, that what, the first thing you do as compliance should be to understand the business that you're operating in. Otherwise, how are you effectively advising them, essentially? But above and beyond that, in terms of the support that you need from compliance to do what you need to do, what are kind of the things that you have, what are the expectations you have of your risk management and compliance functions?
All right, I think the first thing I'd really hope and expect that they understand our business and what it is we do, right? It's a bit different when you're working in an outright advisory firm as opposed to in a financial institution, because they're buckets of risk, right? And your traditional lending unit is low risk. And then when you move to my spectrum, where you're structuring and the like, there's a bit more risk, right? So the idea is to understand that it is maybe a risk accepting unit of the business. Once that's understood, then you don't get a response like it's too risky. You get a response like, probably this is how you can manage your risk best. So I think that's one area where we would probably expect risk and compliance to assist. Compliance should be able to tell us, all right, fine, guys, we actually don't think this is I don't know, this is what was the swindler's name? Anyway, yeah, we actually yeah. So
Netflix guy.
compliance should probably be in a position to help us better identify the parties we're dealing with, and limit our downside in terms of their ability and capacity to perform. I'm not saying they should write guarantees, but on a base level, if you can do something more than go onto Refinitiv, is it, or one of these, and just do your stage one check, that would really be great, because many a time some transactions die further along the line simply because your KYC was not very good. Probably were to blame, but we're working with a checklist, right? Your client needs to present you with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. So if you could probably have an enhanced KYC or something for that's probably one. Number two, I think would so it's really enhancing the process. I think that's the main theme. Everything else would fall into enhancing the process because we would consider compliance or the support around risk and compliance to be the immune system, right? Your immune system does not say don't go outside and play. As you are playing it, it makes sure that you don't get sick.
I love that analogy.
So, yeah.
I've never heard myself described as an immune system. I love it. I think I'm going to use that one.
Yeah. So that would probably be our expectation, right? Beyond that, on the risk side, maybe it'll then be a bit more around actually identifying before we find transactions spaces in the portfolio that may deal with more assets and spaces that are probably packed, right? So that I don't spend a bit of time constructing and creating a transaction with which ALCO will not take purely because we've maxed out on the risk allocation. So that would also be in another way that the support functions can actually help taking a proactive role in actually saying, all right, guys, this is what's happening in this space. This is what's happening in that space, right? And interesting. Okay. With no names, I once did a transaction.
Go ahead. Feel free. Like I said, you're being honest platform. You don't need to mention any specific entity names or person's names, but you can illustrate your point.
Okay, so to illustrate my point, right? We once started working on a transaction with your KYC and the like. And the good thing is we're not too advanced, right? But we could have saved ourselves maybe the 5 weeks. We then discovered that the entity was linked to an international entity that had recently been put on a list.
Yeah.
So pretty much then you can't move on, right?
Yeah.
But you spent 5 weeks calling, emailing these people, taking them for lunch,
But that's the role of due diligence, right? And the responsibility then lies with all parties involved to ensure that the level of due diligence that's being done has drilled down to know who are the beneficial owners of this entity, who really owns it, as opposed to just looking at the face of it. And our KYC, AML kind of sanction screening, all of that type of procedures are supposed to facilitate that process. But as you know, there are limits. Some processes are very manual, depending on the financial institution, organization that you're talking about. Some people use, different platforms and, screening opportunities to be able to do that more efficiently and effectively. But at the same time, everyone involved in it can't just be I'm going to defend compliance a little bit. It can't just be we sent it to compliance, they must figure it out. The client relationship sits with you guys, right? Like you said, you're taking them to lunch. You are probably going to have more ability to have line of sight. But I guess it also means that we have to ensure that you know what you are looking out for, and how deep of a dive you need to be taking so that you're pulling out the right information. So it needs to be more of a partnership in my eyes, as opposed to, we sent it to compliance and they let us carry on for 5 weeks, maybe. I don't know if that was the case in your situation though.
Okay, you're a compliance person, right? So Tom, when you look at when you're looking at a transaction, an acquisition or whatever it is, and a unit within your group, within the financial institution or whatever, is looking to be the ones advising, or they're advising on that transaction. How do you approach your role? What is your responsibility, and who's your obligation to?
So my obligation as the compliance officer advising you on a transaction is to, one, make sure that I have line of sight of the transaction. But obviously, I don't know that's happening unless you bring it to me for starters. So one, you need to come to me as early as you can in the transaction, in the process, and say, Kudzai, we're entering into this transaction. These are the parties. And before I finish answering your question, I'm going to illustrate with a point in terms of my example that I cannot tell you the number of times I was approached when I was in corporate with this transaction needs to happen in 20 minutes. And that's the first it is being brought to me. And I'm like, am I supposed to just like dream up that you're having these transactions? And am I supposed to do this due diligence like I have this computer in my head? So this is why I'm saying that we both have things that we can do better in the process. But I think if you know that your transaction is a 16-week thing or a 3-week thing, then involve compliance right at the beginning, and we get to iron out all these little things and work on them as opposed to it being a last minute thing. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm supposed to be a part of your process throughout. So as in kept informed, I don't need to attend every single meeting and stuff, but definitely kept informed of what's going on. And then you can flag if there's anything specific that needs to be, that is, a red flag from what you know to be red flags in your space. And it's definitely a collaborative effort from, transaction initiation until it's, executed completely, and we let them deliver their wheat in their own time. So it's definitely, in my mind, a partnership from start to finish.
Okay, partnership from start to finish. But within the partnership, what is your objective? What's a win for you?
A win for me is you getting the transaction that you need to get done and making sure that it's not in contravention of any laws and you haven't taken on any unnecessary risk. So I 100% agree with you in terms of it's about risk appetite at the end of the day, right? What is the risk appetite of the business, and understanding what that is and making sure that you're operating within that appetite and within the framework of the regulations. So I can't advise you that, okay, don't do this transaction, it's too risky, if it's within the framework of the law and within the risk appetite of the organization. Those are the two things that I am mainly concerned with. It's not about just saying no. And I think as compliance officers, we're getting to that point, or we've gotten to that point. I'd like to think that we now fully understand that it's not just like, no, it can't be done, and the conversation is done. It's about, okay, these are the challenges, these are the limitations, these are the concerns, constraints. How can we make this transaction work? Again, within the risk appetite and within the regulatory framework that you have to work in. And if we try everything to make that happen, it's a win. If still it can't happen, then then we have to accept that it's not going to work. But our role is to make sure we do everything in our power to make it work.
That's interesting. And you're no longer in these organizations, are you? Are you certain your colleagues are approaching the problem the same way?
Well, like I said, I'm not in corporate anymore, but in the conversations that I have the understanding that the approach of just saying no is because there's no one who's in compliance who doesn't know that we're not the business's favorite person. People are like, oh, we have to involve compliance, and it's a big eye roll. Everyone is aware of that, and the obligation is on us to change that perspective. And the only way we can change that is by making sure we are facilitating business, but in a risk managed way. So it's not a popularity thing. And I think I said that to you earlier on. It's not about, we don't need to be liked. I think we are very clear that we are probably not going to be liked, but we need to do our job.
Yeah. All right.
We have reconciled ourselves with, potentially, not being the most popular person in a business, because that's what you have to do. Sometimes you have to say no, where people just want to run ahead, or slow down, maybe, while we do a little bit more work. But yeah, definitely, it's to support you to achieve what you need to achieve at the end of the day.
All right. All right. I think I take.
Are you happy with my answer? You're not convinced? Has that been your experience?
No,
Maybe that's the question I need to ask you.
I was about to follow up with something else, but no, I'll let you ask the question now.
I'm kidding. Well, I want this to let's talk. If I don't have the answer, I'll tell you. But this is the hard conversation that we have to have, right? I need to hear some difficult truth, or compliance officer need to hear some difficult truth so we can do better. And if I feel I need to defend us, I'll defend us.
Yeah, I think you're doing a pretty decent job of it. And to be honest, we know compliance is relevant, and it's not that we do not like compliance. It's for me, it's the approach or the attitude. I feel like it's you're always starting from a no, right? You're always starting from a no, even after you've gone through the 14-page form, right? You've sent it to the client, you've collected everything, and everything, and that's really just my issue.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
No, definitely.
So
It's a mindset that we definitely need to shift. And, based on what you're saying, there's clearly more work to be done in that regard, that, it's not about starting with a no and the business working their way up to a yes. It's about, okay, we're doing this transaction, but how can we do it in a risk managed way? And if we find ourselves in a no at the end, or after trying everything we can to solution for it, then, that's where we are. But there's definitely a mindset shift. You also mentioned, and we talked a little bit earlier about, people need to understand the business a little bit more. But I'm going to, as compliance officers, your brain, our brains, are typically your legal, your regulatory space. Maybe someone's come in from an audit or an operations space and moved into compliance, right? And we aren't people who are specialists such as yourself. So in as much as I need to take ownership of making sure that I have an understanding of the business, there's only so much I can do for myself unless I'm literally going to study to be you. Okay. So I think the business also has a responsibility in saying, okay, this is our compliance business line of business advisor. She's come in from, I don't know, retail banking maybe, and is moving into this space. How are we going to work with her to make sure that she has the right level of information, knowledge? Otherwise it's YouTube, right? And and stuff like that. What are
But
your thoughts?
that's why you're relevant. That's why you're relevant. Right?
That's why I'm here trying to help people
because
learn.
you're filling the gap. You're filling the gap. So
there's so many lines of business. I don't know how many of these conversations I'd have to have. But I mean, what are your thoughts in terms of the business also making sure that they are arming their compliance risk managers with the level of support and information that they need, and product knowledge and risk understanding? Okay, that no, this is not a loan in the same sense of when you're loaning to Peter, but it's a structured finance and it involves these, large multinational organizations kind of thing. What's your role in ensuring that you're empowering your partner?
okay, so I've been writing. I still haven't answered your due diligence question ever, because that's
okay. We'll get to it. We've got time.
So I owe you two questions now, but
Okay.
I'll start with how can we improve our support. So I think probably the starting point would be to say, what sport are we playing, right? If we're, by what sport are we playing, I mean, what business are we in as an organization, right? What do we provide? Because I know compliance is right across, even if you're like stockbroking, asset managers, banking, advisory, whatever, you name it. There's compliance in there, right? And so the question is, what do we do, right? What do we do here? When we're clear on that, then we can move on to the next thing. So I think stage one is to understand that, yes, you're coming in from legal, from audit, from wherever you're coming in from, and you're getting into a business that does XYZ, which is that understanding the business, right? And once you've done that, your mindset is already approaching the whole problem differently, right? And then naturally we can then progress to getting to educate the people on not to be experts, but enough to understand what influences what, right? Because, for instance, one should just be clear that I don't know, what's a very obvious example in a transaction. Okay, one should be very clear, for instance, that if you have, I don't know what's a very simple example here of something that should be very obvious that compliance should know, but tend to act like.
And tend to act like.
Okay, so
Take your time.
consider you are advising on the purchase of a business, right? And one of the key things that's probably one should know is that a valuation to the business is key to it, because it's the amount someone is going to pay, it's the amount someone is going to get, right? And so compliance, for instance, should be quite clear that when people are now talking in terms of valuations and people's perspectives around it, it's not necessarily a case of any number will fly. And so why is everyone focusing on the valuation and not focusing on the documents I sent? I don't know however long it was, right? Because probably most of it is going to center around the pricing and the deal structure. So then you need to understand that you cannot say, for instance, a transaction cannot be paid from I don't know what's a typical compliance thing. Oh, if someone is buying a business, they need to pay with one account or from one jurisdiction. And I'm like, really, your responsibility here is to be able to ensure that the person who's paying is the same, and wherever they're paying from, that money is fine, right? As opposed to maybe then how do you show that this is the person who's buying it? Then is it really the ultimate beneficial owner type of thing? So it should be very obvious that you, in your personal capacity, have got 3 bank accounts or whatever it is. Why wouldn't a business type of thing?
Yeah.
Because you've done a tick box exercise with one account. Well, maybe you should do it with other accounts, right? So something of the sort. Then you're now more involved in getting us across the goal line in a compliant way, as opposed to you saying, no, guys, this is not compliant. This is not compliant. And then you have a whole list of things that are not compliant and absolutely no suggestion of how we can remedy it. Then so it's
Yeah.
yeah.
No, there's certain things that I'll admit can be very frustrating. Like to your example, is this really a compliance issue or that can't be overcome? Is it a little niggle that you're just like, okay, you know what? We know who this person is. We know these bank accounts belong to them. What is the difference if it's a third and a third and a third? As long as the amount is paid at the end of the day. But also there are typically organizational policies that speak to these things. And the question then becomes, if there is a specific policy that is saying that this is how it is being done, whoever's saying to you it's non-compliant should be able to explain to you what the issue is, the underlying issue is, or why the organization has said we have this policy. I'm not familiar with, obviously your specific organizational policies, but it can't just be a no. I need to say to you, it's a no because X, Y, Z. And maybe it's in this instance, or when the level of risk is at this level, we want it done in a specific way to manage our risk a little bit better. But at the end of the day, it's the compliance officer's responsibility to then say, this is the rationale. Does there need to be an exception to this rule because of XYZ, mitigating factors that you can present to them, which is why I said to you earlier, it's definitely a collaborative effort. And if one party is kind of shutting down and being like, no, then there's no collaboration or solution finding, definitely. But at the same time, yeah.
Can I interrupt you a bit around that?
Yes.
Around the policy, right? And because I'm thinking about policies, and I'm guessing they flow from your regulatory environment into the business and what the business is about, and into the business units, right?
Yeah.
So I'm in a very interesting jurisdiction, and I want to know, have you ever known of a situation where business can actually approach the regulators and the like for a change in overarching policy, because sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And I'll give you an example of running a financial institution in Zimbabwe,
Okay.
where you are exposed to the possibility of value depreciation if you hold a certain amount of liquid, right? But there are restrictions around the number of hard assets you can hold, right? And yet clearly, if it's in the interest of the depositor for you to hold an asset that will keep value, right? So I don't know around that because in my experience, I am yet to see a compliance department that actually says, you know what, guys, yeah, this is not compliant, but we're going to talk to the regulator, or we're going to, I don't know, the associations or something where you can, you know.
Yeah, so definitely there's 3 parts. There's upfront, right? Your engagement with regulators at the point where they are formulating policy and regulations and making sure that you have your voices being heard, right? So if there's a regulatory change that's coming up, and I can't speak specifically to the Zim situation landscape because I'm not in it and haven't been in a while, but just overall, you're going to engage with your regulators at that point where you become aware that they're considering putting in place certain rules, regulations, policies, guidelines, whatever they can be, and make sure you're engaging and having your voice heard. It doesn't necessarily mean that because you don't like it, it's not going to happen, but it's important for you to make sure that you're being part of the conversation, which means you getting the views from your stakeholders, your internal stakeholders, and saying, okay, this piece of legislation is coming up. This is the potential impact. What are your views? Is this something that you want to comment on? So you can engage in that respect. And then with existing regulations, it's obviously a bit more challenging because it's now a law, it's in place. But with every law, there's exceptions to the rule because by its very nature, a law is not something that can cater for every single possible scenario, eventuality that can happen in a business, right? So it's drafted in such a case that it's to deal with the overarching themes, issues, risk management, and stuff like that. But if your specific scenario doesn't necessarily fit, squarely into that, and there's room for exceptions, you need to be able to, you can go to the regulator and say, this is, on the face of it, it looks compliant, but these are the extenuating circumstances. This is why we want to proceed with this transaction. Can we have your approval to get that done? And there's a process. That's what the whole regulatory affairs discipline is about. It's really just engaging with your regulators so that they need to then consider what you're bringing forward and saying, okay, we see what you're saying. This is how you're managing risk for this particular transaction or purchase, whatever the case may be. We're comfortable, you're approved to do it, even though it doesn't sit squarely within the existing regulations. So there are processes, they just need to be followed at the end of the day.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it would be nice if compliance did that before we started complaining.
Send them to me and I'll whip them in shape. I'm just playing. Okay, so back to the due diligence. I know you said you owe me 2 more answers to questions. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but go ahead. I think I said, how important is thorough due diligence in your decision-making process? I think that was a question.
Okay, so I think there's a thing around people trusting us when they come to us for advice when they're executing their transactions, right? And so due diligence is probably the most important aspect. And unlike compliance, we usually do not approach due diligence from a this is right, this is wrong, but from a understand what is happening on the other side of the business and understand even the negatives. Let's say a business is loss making, right? Understand why it's loss making and how those losses actually end up crystallizing as losses consistently, and then see if they can be remedied, and actually take the perspective of, if this were my money, what would they do, right? So that when you're advising on the transaction, you can actually say, fine, we've ascribed value X to this business. We think projections are like this. We think that the losses can be turned around if X, Y, Z, right? So now you start telling the prospective acquirer what's actually happening, right? Okay. And the great thing about this due diligence exercises is you actually do them with the target as well. So on the other side of the fence, they also then get to see things that they may be missing, right? Maybe your record keeping is not as clean. Maybe you're duplicating functions, so you could actually remove some of that cost, type of thing. So that's the due diligence approach that comes in from our end. And I will now admit compliance in this case is very important because you're very good at creating templates. So the boilerplate stuff, we were freed from it really. You go through the boilerplate, and then you get into the business, right? And so to that extent, I will not necessarily trash compliance.
Thank you so much. One thing we're doing right. Happy days.
yeah. So, but yeah, I think, and then after that happens, we don't make decisions for our clients. Our clients make their own decisions. We're agents, and we find the best way to execute going forward. So really, our responsibility in that case would be to just show someone the picture, because remember, sometimes value is actually extracted in a situation that can be fixed. Because if the machine is well oiled, then probably you're not going to get outsized returns, right? So there's also that.
So due diligence in your world is essentially around, looking behind the curtain, seeing how, what's making the machine work. Is what we're seeing on the face of it actually what's happening in the business? And, obviously I think it will affect things like your valuations and things like that. Whereas due diligence in our space, it's like goes back, I guess, to what you were talking about earlier, your AML, like who's actually behind this business, who owns this business, who's financing this transaction, and what's their compliance program like? Do they manage risk effectively, and what does that look like? So those two kind of have to, those two
boilerplate. You could have just gone boilerplate. Yeah,
boilerplate. Yes, I'm liking to. I'm expanding it a little bit more because boilerplate sounds so basic. But yeah, just trying to understand a little bit more like their risk management framework and how they're dealing with that, and then those two worlds, I guess, of due diligence come together to then say, okay, this is a great company, or actually they've got serious problems, or whatever the case may be, to then decide on, like you're saying, your mergers and acquisitions and such. So very interesting, and thanks for clarifying around.
And there's actually an interesting part to, if we look at the public companies now, there's a vested interest for the public, right? For transactions to be executed in a specific kind of way, and there I think compliance plays a key role, specifically if you really need compliance officers who understand what's happening with these transactions. Because remember, now you've got a team that's dealing with material non-public information, right? And this information can actually move the price of a stock before a transaction happens, which hurts your client, which may even hurt the target, right? The target shareholders may enjoy the uptick, but if it's a merger that's going to create better value in the long run, then it may then end up not happening, right? And it also hurts your organization, right? Because if you have an organization that's given work and then information comes out and the like, so you then need to be really strict around your data protection, around your communication, around who knows what, and even things as if you're on a transaction, you cannot trade the stock, right? If you owned the stock before, then your trades are frozen. Whatever position you're in, you know that the stock is now going to tank, right?
You're stuck with it.
You're stuck with it, right? And so compliance can play a key role there in formulating policies that guard the general society and guide the people who are executing these transactions on what's legal and what's illegal, and not only that, what's ethical and what's unethical. So that's a space that's probably more niche to when you're dealing with public transactions, but I think the same applies to private transactions to a certain extent. Although the exposure in terms of the public is a bit smaller there. So there, I think, you come out guns blazing with your checklists and all that
with
stuff.
with our
Publish no
Chinese
trade
walls
lists and
and
all that stuff.
insider trading policies and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
No, I mean, those are all critical, but I said, like, policies are one thing, and it's great to have them, and checklists are one thing, but back to where our conversation started. If you don't know that actually this transaction is sensitive and these are the rules, and this is what triggers this policy to be applied, and these are the areas impacted, because you don't have that fundamental underlying understanding of the business, then it will become very difficult for you to know when these things are being triggered, because you don't actually understand what's going on. So ultimately, I think it's important that at the base of it, you have your foundation always for compliance anyway has to definitely be an understanding, and making sure, like you're saying, if you're supporting an area that's dealing with public sector and those transactions in that space, then these are the things that you need to be the things you need to be thinking about as a compliance officer, and making sure you're advising the business around them, and don't go talking about it when you're having a coffee. And I think a lot with someone who works somewhere else, but those are just, I think, the nuances that and I think we do have an understanding, but the level, and I know you said no one needs to be a specialist specifically, and I have no aspirations or capacity to become one, but I think one thing that I do like to recommend people is don't be afraid to look, dumb. Remember, beginning of the conversation, I said, explain it to me in simple terms. I was like, you know what? Let me, understand this, Bongi. Please take me through it. I've just seen a comment on the channel saying, I think we no longer use the word Chinese walls, it is information barriers. You are very correct. Thanks for the correction. It's been a long time since I've been in corporate when such terms were still being used. But yeah, I've lost my chain of thought. But essentially, yeah, we need to just make sure that we have a firm understanding of what's going on in the business, so that we can actually support
that's where you're at.
thoroughly. At the end of the day.
And you should not be afraid to say, take me through.
That's what I was saying. We should not be afraid to say, Bongi,
Yes.
please, can you explain, give me the idiot's guide of structured finance, so that I can better support you as your compliance officer. And then I think if you can take the time to do that, it'll better serve you in terms of the support that you need ultimately at the end of the day. And I know we've already talked about this a little bit in terms of your overall experience of compliance, and what we can do better and all of that. But would you say that ultimately you feel that it adds value to what you do on a day-to-day basis? Or actually, it's a nice to have, it's good, I understand why we need it, but I could do without a whole compliance function?
I think we can look at this independent of myself and my experience. Actually,
Yeah.
if we are to assume that anything that is of no use eventually dies away, I'm pretty certain when the history of organizations started, there were many departments and roles that no longer exist. So I think there must be some value somewhere from a market perspective that's being brought to the table by compliance. And yes, in my personal experience, compliance has been quite useful. It really has. It's okay. Now I'm concerned about being all right. It really helps with your CYA. All right. It really helps with your CYA, right? Just to, if for those who know what CYA is, it's quite key for that, because you check your bases, you get the basics right, and then you can develop on that. And it always helps to have someone with a different viewpoint to yours, right? If you sit three of us in a room, we'll probably talk ourselves into thinking we can literally do anything. And sometimes it helps for someone to actually say, hold on, calm down. Have you considered? Have you considered? Have you considered? So definitely, yes, there's value in compliance in my experience. And probably that risk management is what ensures and secures a long-term viability for what it is that we do. Because the moment we stop being pedantic about who we're dealing with, the moment we stop being pedantic about has this threshold been met? Has that been realized? Then pretty soon no one is going to trust us to transact, and the whole thing unravels, because at the end of the day, we exist because we're supposed to be shrinking the gap for asymmetric information, right? So if I don't do that well, and I then don't bridge the gap between investor and investee, or if I don't then manage to structure a proper transaction that makes sure that there's XYZ fertilizer in a country or whatever it is, then probably will not exist. So yeah, the importance cannot be overstated. It's quite critical. However,
However,
yeah,
I knew it was coming.
no. That's about it.
No, I'm glad you say that, but I do also appreciate that there's we have room for improvement. We could definitely support business better, and the onus is on us to make sure that we are educating ourselves and changing our mindset to make sure that we are operating in a way that supports and facilitates business as opposed to hinders it, which is the typical narrative that we face at the moment. But at the end with that being said, at the end of the day, regulations are in place for a reason. It's about doing business safely, and you're there and you talked about ethics and integrity and all of that. And you mentioned it in one of your answers earlier on. And the fact of the matter is, not everyone is going to operate in that way. There are your rogue traders, your cowboys and stuff like that. And a function like compliance, has to then be that voice in the organization to be like, okay, I think we're ignoring the regulations, or some people, it's like we're ticking the boxes in terms of regulatory compliance, but we're not actually following the spirit of what is trying to be achieved here. You're literally just tick boxing and exercise. So I see our role as also making sure that we're breathing that culture into an organization of, like you said, stop, let's think about it this way. How can we do it and make sure that we're respecting the regulations, because they exist for a reason, so businesses can do business safely and continue to exist, like you said. But at the same time, let's not use the regulations as a stick that we're beating the business with, and or handcuffs to stop them achieving what they're doing. So I think we can all kind of, there's definitely value in compliance. I feel like there is. I am one. So, I would obviously feel that way. But we definitely do have a role to play to make sure that we're doing business, doing better for the businesses that we support. I'm just going to pop to the questions, the chat quickly, and see if we've got any questions there. And if anyone's got a question for Bongi, and I know there's lots of comments, but if there is a specific question you want to ask him, please pop it in the chat and I'll pick it up from there. Daniel says the issue in such scenarios is that compliance wasn't carried along from the beginning. Also, the business have been advised via policies and also training on red flags to look out for, but they ignore. Then compliance becomes the enemy. I think that was that point around early engagement with compliance and making sure that you're not just coming to Kudzai at midnight and being like, approve this transaction before it dies, which has happened to me in the past, mind you. Where is this? It's a comment. I think, okay, the Chinese walls. Do we have anyone following up compliance issues with regard to Zim? Like who's looking out for insider trading, etc.? Sorry, I came to the party late. I'm not sure if I understand your question, Brian. Clearly.
Who's looking out for
do you mean like the
regulator? Okay.
Regulator or what? I'm not clear.
Yeah, probably. Sure. I don't know. I'm going to guess and say, yeah, there's well, there are requirements from the regulator. The Zimbabwe Stock Exchange requires disclosures from all material insiders, right? So you will find that if you go on the website, there are announcements every time a director or whoever trades the shares of a company that they hold. For advisors and the like, their internal compliance departments who set like what I was talking about, no trade lists, and that sort of thing, right? And you have closed periods, and the like. So they would be monitoring they would be monitoring your trading. So yeah, the regulator does, the ZSE does, and I would imagine that pretty much anyone in a financial institution and Zim, their compliance function would have something of the sort in place. So yeah.
No, absolutely. So yeah, he's saying yes, regulator. So yeah, your capital markets regulator anyway would typically set rules around that, and then the compliance function would create policies to make sure that people are following those rules and regulations that have been put in place by the regulator. So in Zim, you said it's the
the ZSE. That's the exchange. The rules around the exchange have that. So their directors need to disclose that type of thing. Anyone who's considered, okay, actually, this may be too much in the weeds, but yeah, anyone who's considered to be in a position where they would know share price changing, non-public material information, right? Your compliance department would need to identify who that is in the organization, and those things will be monitored.
No, for sure. It just suddenly, I had a flashback of the Martha Stewart situation when she, I don't know why she came to my head, but she did, as the example of people like insider trading or sharing information that, material non-public information with people and getting rid of stock and all that sort of stuff, and, ending up in jail as a result of violating those rules. I don't know why Martha, maybe I need to beg. I don't know why she came into my mind, but that's always a good example of why those rules shouldn't be breached and the potential implications for people who do. But with that being said, and I'm looking at the time, and as always, I like to keep time, and yes, we have been having this chat for a few minutes shy of an hour. I just want
to. But I haven't even used all my jokes yet.
You haven't even used, Bongi. I told you need to insert your jokes intermittently as we go along. Not wait for the end. No, but I mean, is there anything that you feel is maybe left unsaid or that you want to add in terms of just that relationship that we have between business and compliance, and I don't know, any observations on your part that you want to share?
No, I think maybe to say invite me next year.
Same time next year.
I enjoy our conversations, and I'd like to congratulate you on still being around. Yeah, it says a lot to be able to come back to a show a year later, and the traffic seems to have increased on the comments and the like, so the show is growing. It seems to be relevant, and so yeah, congratulations on that. That's really about it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking your time to be here and to share your world with us. I know it's corporate finance is not a small topic. It's a complex space, but you've explained it in a way where we can kind of get a better understanding of the inner workings, and hopefully inspire someone who's like, okay, I want to be in compliance or risk management in that space, and this is what I can do to be a good and effective compliance officer within that space. So much appreciated. I don't see any other questions on the chat, so I think we've addressed everything that's there. And I will think of something to have another conversation with on our second year. This was our first year anniversary. We're going to be having anniversaries from now on. Our second anniversary.
No, other people need to know.
I'm joking. We won't use that term. We won't use that term. We're both not going to use that term. But thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights with us. It's much appreciated. And for everyone who joined the live conversation, thank you so much, whether it was halfway through or you made it through the entire conversation. More great guests and conversations coming up for your knowledge and learning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, share this video. It's always much appreciated that you support. And like when you said, we're trying to grow and be here next year and the year after that. So please do continue to support Compliance Conversations and KC Compliance in general. So yeah, with that being said, Pretty much on the dot. I'm very impressed with my timekeeping. I'm going to I'm going to close out this session of Compliance Conversations. Thank you so much, everybody, and especially my guest, Bongi. And I will catch you
Pleasure.
next time. Cheers.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.